I'm ready for the second topic now, which is monitoring. And remember this diagram. Of course, what we've got in the middle here is the triple constraint of scope, cost, and time. And then quality is often considered as an additional factor. And you've got all of these pressures, all of these risk, things that could happen that are pushing against this triple constraint, or this triangle. They're constraining the implementation and threatening what's being done. So monitoring is really trying to pay attention to what's happening relative to the plan, and it's especially important at the lower level of the log frame hierarchy of objectives, at the output and the activities and of course the inputs. And then also monitoring the risk is extremely important. One of the tools that I want to look at under monitoring is the work breakdown structure. And hopefully that's one that you've been putting into practice. And just want to remind you, remember that a work breakdown structure is the detailing of all of the work, but not more than the work that needs to be done in order to complete a project. And there are different ways of representing the detail. One of the ways is to use an indented format like this. Another way is to use a graphical format with different levels. And as some of you know, you can convert from one to the other. So the information is the same, but it's just the presentation. But the idea is that the log frame and the proposal and what was done during project identification and design did not provide enough detail to do a good job of implementation. So you need to have, during the detailed project planning phase, first of all, to break down those outcomes, those activities that are in the log frame, in the plan, into a lot more detail, enough detail that will allow someone to do the work in the right way. Here's the question I want you to consider now. How could we use a work breakdown structure as a monitoring tool? Here are some of the ways that I've identified. First of all, the log frame, which is often part of the proposal, does not provide enough for monitoring. It doesn't provide enough detail. The work breakdown structure provides that detail that's needed to fill in the void. Secondly, monitoring tools can be built around the details provided in the work breakdown structure, so that often you're preparing checklist or other documents that will be used by those implementing to provide the monitoring, and they often use the very information that's in the work breakdown structure. Thirdly, simple monitoring processes can be completed by confirming completion of each unit that has been detailed in the WBS. In other words, the WBS, or the representation of the WBS, especially in a project schedule, which is called a Gantt chart, is a key monitoring tool that's used based upon the detail that comes from the WBS. So the Gantt chart is extremely important. And finally, the work breakdown structure analysis allows more in-depth analysis of the cause of and explanations for identified variances. So remember that there are going to be changes that happen during the implementation, and the work breakdown structure helps to provide more of a detail so that you can see what some of the causes of those changes might be. Now, another tool that's useful in monitoring is the issues log. The issues log, remember, is taking what actually happens, the problems that happen during implementation, and records them on some kind of a register. So you usually have some type of a format like this. You list the issue, identify who the owner. Now, sometimes there can be another column here that indicates who raised the issue, because that might be important for accountability purposes. The status is then what is actually happening. This is a description of what the situation currently is, and then this can be updated as the resolution proceeds. A date that the issue was opened, and then once the issue is resolved and closed, you put in the closure date, and then what is the planned resolution or the actual resolution. So that the idea is that issues enter the issue log, they're managed, and then they exit the issues log. So the question I want to ask you is, how could we use the issues log as a monitoring tool? Here are some ideas that I had about how we could use the issues log. That the information that's in the issues log, the issues often lead to variances. In other words, you have some kind of problem related to cost, time, or scope. It often means that you're either behind schedule, you're under or over budget, and you are not delivering the scope that you intended. So the issues log tells us what some of those differences are. Secondly, the issue management often explains and in many cases justifies the variances. So in other words, just because a project has variances doesn't mean that the manager's doing a bad job. There could be some very logical reasons and explanations, and the changes and the variances may very well be necessary for good project management and to bring about the kinds of results that are intended. Thirdly, changes often result from issue management, and those changes must be represented in the monitoring plans. So that monitoring and evaluation plan that I showed you earlier needs also to be a living document, and the information that will help will help the monitoring people and those that are looking at the processes of monitoring and evaluation closely to keep their plans updated. And finally, monitoring can identify issues that have not yet been logged, alerting the project manager to become more proactive. So the monitoring processes might actually identify some more issues that need to be put into the register or the log and managed. So that's extremely important.